VikesNow, Dustin Baker, January 27th. I'm here with Josh Frey. We're doing a Friday today, not a Wednesday, for some scheduling conflicts, mostly on this end. How are you, sir?
I'm doing good, man. Let me tell you something though.
Mm-hmm.
This past playoff win, apparently the last playoff game really got to me because I was in the bathroom the other day, looked in the mirror, and I had a gray hair in my beard. So I think the
Yeah.
Vikings are prematurely aging me. So that
Yeah.
just getting that on record. If I go a little early, it's because of the Vikings.
Well, welcome to the party. I don't know if you can see it
Yeah.
on camera, but I started getting those probably 8 years ago. The weirdest thing in the world is I don't have any on my head, but they're intertwined throughout the beard. So we'll have to start a podcast about gray beards when we both
Yeah,
get
there we
there.
go.
All right. So, gray beards aside, the Viking stuff, hot and heavy this week, has been defensive coordinator since you and I talked, kind sir. They indeed fired Ed Donatel, I believe it was last Thursday, and have since interviewed 4 candidates after that. But before I ask you about the candidates, I want to know, no matter who it is, can the defense be transformed in a single year to enable this championship window that they think they have?
I definitely think it could be better. I
Mm-hmm.
don't think it really could get much worse than it was in 2022, but I don't see this going from like one of the very worst units in the league to a top five in 2023. I think they can get back up to average, maybe a little bit above that, but I don't see a huge turnaround just in one year because I don't think everything about this defense has to do with Ed Donatel. I think
Mm-hmm.
scheme was a problem, but I also look at the fact that majority of the starters were either near 30 or above 30. And with all the problems that they had, especially a linebacker with speed and Patrick Peterson getting burned every once in a while, Harrison Smith not being the as fast as he used to be, I think that that's at least part of the problem with the defense. So I'm skeptical saying that they're going to turn this thing around and it's going to look absolutely fantastic in 2023. And they're like the Eagles where they're posting record sack numbers, stuff like that. But I there's definitely room for improvement. I think if you get a little bit younger on that side of the ball, I think that there's a good chance that they can improve.
On my other show with Brian McKinney, Sal Spice kind of surprised me and said that the Super Bowl window to her isn't open any longer. And it feels like, 2 months ago, we were chilling at 11-2, whatever it was, and it was alive and well and open. So I want to ask you before we talk about the DC candidates, with your speech there on the defense, it sounds like you think they can get up to average, with a good defensive coordinator hire, a good draft, whatnot. Is the Super Bowl window still open with Kirk, of course, O'Connell, hopefully, and then Jefferson? Is that still there, or are we really just doing all this to go 12-5 and maybe win a playoff game?
Oh man, that's a really loaded question this early in the offseason.
Yeah, it is. It is.
I mean, I think that there's a way that they could, like, even this year, like
Mm-hmm.
they had absolutely no business being 13-4 with how they played in those close games. That's the reason that they went 13-4
Mm-hmm.
because they had so many things go their way in those close games. So could they find a way to win a Super Bowl next year with a better defense and the offense clicks as well as it did in 2022? Sure, I would think that pretty much any of these playoff teams can look at any one thing on their roster right now and say, if we improve this,
Mm-hmm.
we can go win a Super Bowl next year. So I think that the Super Bowl window is not necessarily closed. I don't think that they're going to be a favorites going into next year by any means. But I wouldn't say that they can't win a Super Bowl, if that makes any sense.
Yes, it does. And I like to lift up. So Bill Parcells, let me say it this way. The website, the 33rd team, which kind of shot up out of nowhere in the last year. I think everybody who ever played football or coached writes for the 33rd team.
It's crazy. Yeah.
Bill Parcells got on there and either dictated to somebody or wrote about the 14 playoff teams, what they need to do to get better. And unsurprisingly, Parcells, the defensive brain and genius, Zimmer's mentor, unsurprisingly, the only thing he talked about was defense. And he claimed that the way that the Vikings won in 2022 is emphatically not sustainable, which is you're not going to go 11-0 in one-score games or probably anywhere close to it. And therefore, you've got to rebuild the defense. So in that vein, I kind of vastly, I'm firmly comfortable with looking at life after Kirk because we've done 5 years of this. So if they draft some guy, 23rd pick or in the third round, great. I'm glad they're thinking that way. But then when you digest the season, you think like, well, maybe you just need a defense And playmakers, the Rams won the thing with Stafford, and that's why I asked you the question about whether or not the Super Bowl window is closed or if it was even open. Like, I think we had to look at ourselves in the mirror and be like, God, we're 11-2. Of course, Super Bowl window's open. But we shall see. On the 4 candidates, Sean Desai from a Bears heavy background last year with the Seahawks. And then Brian Flores, everybody's favorite. He came from the Dolphins and the linebackers coach with the Steelers. Ryan Nielsen, kind of a dark horse. Nobody knows too much about him. Co-defensive coordinator. And then everybody's least favorite because he's an in-house candidate, Mike Pettin. A, who do you want? B, who will it be, even if it's not somebody on that list?
Well, if we want to say the Super Bowl window is open for 2023, and that's kind of where KOC and Kwesi decide to go with this roster construction, I think Brian Flores is bar none the best option to go right now and improve the defense, go contend for a Super Bowl. I say that just because I'm not necessarily sure if he's going to stay around long term, just because he's always going to be in the head coaching cycle every single year that he doesn't get it. So I think that if they want to go try to win a Super Bowl 2023, he's my choice. I hope they give Jim Leonard out of Wisconsin an interview, just because I think that he did so many good things with the defense. He put so many defensive linemen, defensive linebackers into the NFL at Wisconsin with the Badgers. They were one of the best defenses in the entire country for like 5 years with him at the helm. So I hope they give him an interview. If they want to go long-term solution, I think he's the guy. They want to go win a Super Bowl right now, it's Brian Flores.
Okay. Do you have any like insider intel that Leonard would be in the mix, or that's your hope?
That's my hope.
Okay.
If they want to go with one of the 4 guys that they've already interviewed, I'd go to Desai, just because I think he's done some pretty good things, and he's done it at the NFL level. So
okay. So you mean you would take Desai over Flores based if you were Kevin O'Connell based on what you know?
Yeah, so I guess I'm kind of giving you 3 guys now. So here we are. Brian Flores is number 1, because if you want to go win a Super Bowl right now, it's Brian Flores. Long term, I hope they give Jim Leonard an interview, just because I want to see what they think of him.
Okay.
And he'd kind of be my choice for the long term. Out of the guys that they haven't interviewed, of the guys that they've interviewed, Sean Desai is my long-term guy.
Okay. All right. So that leaves Nothing Burger on Pettin, which is kind of a popular sentiment. And then Nielsen, I thought would be your guy because your I guess former Saints connections.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think he'd be bad by any means, but Dennis Allen was there every single year that he was around. And I mean, he's a terrible head coach, but he's a very good defensive coordinator. So I don't know how much impact that he actually had on that defense over those years. So I think the safe bet would be either Flores or Desai, of the guy that said that they've interviewed.
All right. The one thing that I find funny is we get an offense coach, and one thing that annually got on our nerves from about 2016 until last year is whether it was DeFilippo getting fired prematurely, Kevin Stefanski getting promoted, Gary Kubiak retiring. We always have upheaval on the offensive staff. Now we should have a period of hopefully 15 years. We don't have to worry about that shit on offense because you'll always have Kevin O'Connell. But now here we are, and it's defense. So we might, and this is the way you want it to go. You want your defensive coordinator to coach so well that another team wants them. But each season that we do this show around this time, we might be chatting about defensive coordinators. And we want to be, because that means that the season went well and the guy is coveted. All right. The next one that I find incredibly juicy and interesting because of all the stars that would align is the Trey Lance chatter over the week. Yannick Eckhart from Vikings territory, I think, got it out in the atmosphere. Maybe he stole it from somebody he won't confess to be. Judd Zolgat from Score North and Vikings Wire have all talked about this idea of Trey Lance and the Vikings. Okay, so I'm going to set this up for you, and you tell me where you land. A, the young man is from Marshall, Minnesota. B, he went to NDSU. C, the Vikings general manager has serious ties to the San Francisco 49ers, 6 years worth. D, if Brock Purdy is the real deal, they may not want 2 guys on the same roster fighting it out. What am I at? D or E, they might want to salvage the Trey Lance trade by trading him elsewhere. F, Kirk Cousins is 35 years old, and they might want to plot for the afterlife. Does all of that feel like smoke to you, or does that say like, hey, they might actually explore that?
I think they'll probably explore it. I hope they don't put a deal through for it though.
Okay.
I liked Trey Lance coming out of the draft, but he was out of those five guys like Trevor Lawrence, Zach Wilson, Lance, Fields, Mac Jones. He was the
Mm-hmm.
wild card.
Mm-hmm.
He was the wild card for me, where it could go either way. He's either going to be a complete bust or he's going to be a superstar. And we've seen him play over the past 2 years now. What, like 3, 4 games
Mm-hmm.
in his entire NFL career? He had one starting season at NDSU. I I I I don't love it. I think if you're going to go after a young guy, don't trade away the picks that you've
Okay.
got. Just go use one on him. Like if the 49ers want to try to recoup what they got, what they spent for Trey Lance, then I that's going to take a lot. That's going to take a lot to try to recruit that because they spent a lot on him. But if the Vikings really feel like they need to go get a young quarterback now, I'd go draft one, or I'd kick the tires on Jordan Love,
Okay.
on a Jordan Love trade. If the Packers want to stick with Rodgers and they don't want to deal with, do we pay Jordan Love after not seeing him? Do we want to try to get something for him? Because I think it's a lot easier to try to recoup that than Trey Lance. And the Packers might be open to moving him. It might take a lot for them to trade in division, maybe a couple future picks, but I like what I've seen out of Jordan Love in the few chances that he's got with the Packers. So if they're going to kick a tire on a guy that's already in the league, and it's an unproven guy, go after Jordan Love, not Trey Lance.
Yeah, and a year ago I would have told you you were a moron because the Vikings are going to
Yeah.
trade for the Packers. However,
Yeah.
that's all
It's
they
happened.
do. That's all they
Yep.
do is trade with NFC North teams. That's the
Yep,
thing.
exactly.
That's the new big thing. So I won't rule that out anymore. I would have looked you dead in the eye here on this show and been like, why do you even say that on here? But now it's for real. What about Mr. Brady? NFLanalysis.net, I think, is a semi-credible site. Source an anonymous executive that said the Vikings could be a dark horse for Brady at age 46, which would mean they'd probably have to trade Cousins to Tampa and maybe get whatever he would command, a second rounder or something like that. I'm guessing Kwesi would draft an heir apparent and then roll with Brady for a year. Is that fool's gold or what?
Listen, man, if they gotta go get Tom Brady, I'd be in for the headlines alone. that'd be
ride.
So fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, even if it is for 1 year and you have to get rid of Cousins and whatever you have to do, why not? He's a 7-time Super Bowl champ. He dragged this Buccaneers team kicking and screaming to the playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
Why not kick the tires on that? That'd be so fun.
Yeah, I tried to poke around, and that's the only place where that came from was NFLanalysis.net. And I like I said, I think they get decent traffic. I think they're somewhat credible. But whenever you see anything like that, that could have been just some imaginary source that, oh, well, let's spice up the pot here. So I think the Brady thing is a long shot. However, if he wasn't 46, if he was like 39, then it would be the Viking way. No doubt about it.
Yeah.
But right now you just have to worry like, all right, are we going to be the team that gets victimized by the year that Brady's actually bad? Of course we are. All right. Positional needs is the last topic of the day. I'm going to lasso free agency and the draft because it's really tricky for me to ask you what should they draft when we haven't even seen a free agent class. So I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt. In order, I don't know if you want to do a top 5 or top 3 or which way you want to start. That's up to you. If the Vikings do want to extend the Super Bowl window, it sounds like the stuff they're chirping about the championship standard between Kwesi and Mr. O'Connell. It sounds like they want to win. And the other thing that's weird is I truly believe, based on their quotes, that the players and the coaches were absolutely heartbroken by losing to the Giants, which leads me to believe that they really thought they were good. You and I questioned it in the last month about what's this DVOA shit keep telling me that they're really bad. But I'm pretty sure the players and coaches believe that they were an awesome team. So if they subscribe to that theory and want to win the damn thing next year, in order of whatever you choose, give me positional needs for free agency and or the draft.
Well, first and foremost, I think we need to be prepared that whatever we think that they need, not all of them are going to get filled between limited money and limited draft picks. But with that being said, I think first and foremost, whether it kind of goes against what I've said in the past with some of my linebacker talk, but I think that cornerback is one of the biggest needs for this team moving forward, especially with Duke Shelley and Patrick Peterson both entering free agency.
Two guys that are like guaranteed good last year. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. The only guys that we've got now are like Dantzler, Booth, and Evans, which if Booth and Evans come back and they're like anything that they showed in training camp, or Evans is anything like he was when he started games this season, I'd be fine with it. I think we need to see Booth get on the field and stay healthy before I'm totally good with him being a starter in the NFL. But I do think that right now you have to go get a veteran at the cornerback position, whether it's that massive Jalen Ramsey trade, whatever it's going to take to get him, or that whatever, if apparently they're kicking the tires on, or somebody in free agency. I do think that that's one of the big things that they have to go do is sign a veteran cornerback that can start right away for them and play well. And then
hold on real quick. I want to cut you off for a second. So I was talking with Cole Smith, who writes for Vikings Territory, about this. The funny part about this is, so let's assume Duke Shelley comes back and Peterson said that he wants to finish his career in Minnesota. So you've got those 5 guys, Patrick Peterson, Duke Shelley, Cameron Dantzler, Andrew Booth, and Caleb Evans. Now going into 2023, you might, with that group, be like, I don't know who the guy is. It's a bunch of them. However, if you do get a Ramsey or a Ramsey tight who's guaranteed to be solid, then the rest of the group feels somewhat fine.
That is gravy.
Yeah. Isn't that weird? Like, you just need
crazy.
one guy to nail it down, because you have to assume Peterson's probably going to go back to decent, not like he was the first 10 weeks. I think for these purposes, although it may not be true, you have to assume that Shelley was a mirage. I mean, not that he will be, but as a general manager, you have to be like, he probably overachieved. And then you have no idea what to expect from the other 3. So it's weird how one stabilizing force could really do the trick, and hopefully they know that. All right, what's number 2?
Number 2, I'm going to stick with linebacker, just because we saw Eric Kendricks and Jordan Hicks get torched by the Giants wide receivers that entire playoff game. I think that's the biggest reason that they lost, is they just weren't fast enough to keep up with a lot of the guys on the field. So I think in the draft, that's where I'd go, especially first round. Trenton Simpson, I'm going to keep pounding the drum. If he's there at 23, I'm jumping all over it. I wouldn't necessarily trade up for him. If he goes, I'd probably trade down and try to get a day 2 pick and select somebody there, like a Noah Swell, Henry TuaTua, somebody like that. But if Trenton Simpson is there at 23 of the draft, I'm turning the pick in. I'm sprinting to Roger Goodell and getting that pick in. So yeah, that's number 2.
That's how I felt about Kyle Hamilton last year, and they didn't do it. So I remain convinced, even if he's there for better or worse, I'm convinced that when they made the Hawkinson train, Kwesi knew, well, I'm going to be trading whatever pick I have anyway, so I'll get a second rounder just like that. I think that's their little documentary they had last year. I think that is their mantra, is that the value, like Kwesi talks about ad nauseum, is between like mid first round and then whatever into the second round. And so, I think the cool part is that I realized, and so did you, that the off-ball linebackers, even when things were going great in October, that I was like, what's wrong? They're not, they're not very good. And I think you brought this Simpson dude up and said, keep an eye on him, because, and that was when things were going perfect, whatever, 8-2. And, then they went pear-shaped in the playoffs. So here we are talking about the same thing we did. All right. Sorry to cut you off. Number 3.
Number 3, I think you got to go interior defensive line. I think you go either way, free agency or draft with this. I think there's not going to be, like, after Jalen Carter, you're not going to find like superstars as an interior pass rusher, somebody like that. But I think in day 2, day 3 of the draft, you're going to find somebody solid. And then in free agency, you can probably find somebody again too, whether it's bringing back Dalvin Tomlinson, who's entering free agency, or signing another veteran to a relatively cheaper deal like they got Tomlinson on to begin with. I think that's a big spot that you need, because the pass rush just wasn't good for the majority of the season, especially on the interior. Like, teams there's a reason Zadarius Smith and Danielle Hunter were quiet for much of the year. And I think it's because that's all the defense that opposing offensive lines had to worry about, is just stop those guys and nobody else is going to get home. So I think that's an area that they need to improve in.
It's been forever, even when the Zimmer defense was at its peak. It's been forever since we had a 3-tech like that was like more than just a schmo like Shamar Stephen. Sheldon Richardson was good in spots, but talking about maybe like a top 10 guy at that spot, it's like we've always just been like, nah, we'll get Jonathan Bullard, we're fine. So it would be nice to get the edge there in addition to the edge rushers. Do you have a 4th or no?
4th, if I had to pick, it's still wide receiver. Okay. I think, just because I think KJ Osborne is a great wide receiver 3. Like, I think that he's going to have games against especially some of the worser defenses in the league where he just pops off the screen and he's going to look absolutely incredible. I struggle to believe that he's going to be a consistent wide receiver too, though. Like the
Mm-hmm.
Adam Thielen type that gets anywhere from 6 to 8 catches, 70 to 100 yards, and a touchdown a game.
Yeah.
Especially that we saw like 2019, 2020 from Thielen. So I do think that that's an area that I'm not necessarily convinced that they're going to be able to fill, just because of all the other needs on the defense and the price tag that's going to come with a lot of the receivers in free agency that would be able to fill that type of role.
Mm-hmm.
But if there's a way to fill it, that's definitely a need, and I think that they should kick the tires on somebody at least to fill in that wide receiver 2 spot.
Yeah, I think it's self-evident now that teams have somewhat of a blueprint to stymie Justin Jefferson. And
Yes.
Thankfully for his sake, usually that means he only gets 75 receiving yards. And there'll be 2 games a year where he's a non-factor because they completely sell out, like the Packer game. Oh, and there's one other one I can't remember. Was it Lions? It was somebody.
Lions, yeah.
Okay. And so, yeah, then Hawkinson can take the heat off a lot of that. That's why you traded for him. And that'll be good for those, 9 catches, 80-yard days. But after that, assuming Thielen doesn't return to form, then you're looking in the mirror going, well, hopefully it's Jalen Naylor. And
you're right.
Yeah. Otherwise, you got to investigate like Darius Slayton or Juju Smith if you think they could be a WR2, or do everybody's favorite thing, draft a wide receiver early in the draft. So I think curiously, I think the only thing that you would have neglected that we usually talk about at this time of year is the offensive line. Are you content with an offensive-minded head coach, 2 cornerstone tackles? Are you trusting them just to figure out the other 3 spots, because that's usually what teams do?
Yeah, I mean, at this point, I'm kind of thinking that they're going to bring Bradbury back on some sort of mid-level deal, maybe 1-2 years for like 10 million, something like that, just to keep the consistency on the O-line. And then I'm good with the guards at this point. I think Ingram's going to get better in year 2. Cleveland was very good throughout much of the season, at least in my opinion. And then, like you said, they've got 2 of the best offensive tackle duos in the entire league. So I think that they're good on the offensive line, especially with the needs on the defense. I wouldn't even worry about it.
And then it was also a testament to the new coaching staff. And perhaps the way we need to start thinking about life is when Brian O'Neill was out, it really was like, oh, cool. Oli Udoh did just fine. And we're not used to that. We're used to, oh, God, it's going to be a shit show, which it was. But it wasn't this year. It seems that Chris Cooper and the gang were like, oh, okay, well, we've got these guys as reservists for a reason. And even Chris Reed figured it out after a naughty start in Green Bay. So I hope we're in a new era of offensive line mentality where, Brian O'Neill is hurt or Darisaw is down for the game. We don't have to think, as doomsday-esque as we usually do because of our scars with the offensive line. All right. I think that does most of it for the show. How about a prediction for DC defensive coordinator?
For defensive coordinator, I think they're gonna get Flores, just because with all the news around Peyton in Arizona, I don't think he's gonna get that head coaching job. And I think Denver's out now with Flores. So I do think that Flores is going to be the guy, especially they talk about that championship standard. I think they're going to go all in and try to get this thing done in 2023.
You think they're waiting for any 49ers coaches or anything to chat with?
They could probably they could, but I think if anything that they're probably going to be looking at head coaching gigs more than other coordinator jobs with D'Amico Ryans, right?
Well, no, I was thinking there's like Daniel Bullock's the safeties coach. Like, I'm basically kind of wondering if this will drag into next week because they're waiting to see who loses Sunday. That way they can talk to, a linebacker coach for the Bengals or something like that.
It definitely could. I mean, if they're available, it might as well kick the tires on giving them an interview. But I think that the guys are ultimately going to be Flores.
Okay. Well, hey, we'll take it. That's overwhelmingly what the fan base wants. And you really can't see a way of that going wrong. Because the guy is kind of known as like the anti-O'Connell, like, gritty, mean. I don't know if he's a player's coach. Maybe he is. And then they can balance each other out. You've got the eternal optimist and nice guy in O'Connell, and then this bulldog on defense. All right, man. We'll be back next Wednesday on schedule. That gives us 5 days between shows. I'm going to bet that we'll have juicy stuff to talk about next Wednesday. Any closing arguments?
Who you got this weekend?
Oh, I've been tormented. That's a really good question. So the high ankle sprain, I don't know if you heard my speech on that. When a guy gets that in the NBA or Irv Smith, they're out for 2 months. And I've just learned to accept, and it stands out so hardcore in my brain because you hear ankle sprain, you're like, oh, he'll be fine. He'll be back in 10 minutes. But you hear high ankle sprain, it's 2 months. So I'm concerned about Mahomes. However, I just can't see a universe where the Chiefs get beat by the same team 4 times. And so I'm going to take the home team in the Chiefs. And then I'm even more torn on the other one because I watched that Cowboys 49ers game, and San Francisco is so hungry and they execute so well that if they had anybody else at quarterback, like Derek Carr, Kirk Cousins, Matthew Stafford, I would be like, boom, 49ers, no questions asked.
Yeah.
But I am worried that Purdy got away with some dropped interceptions against the Cowboys, and nobody cares.
That he did.
Yes. And so ultimately, I don't want to pick the Eagles. And I do think that the 49ers execute a little bit better. So I think if I was going to gamble on it, I would say money lines, I'd go with the 49ers and Chiefs. Do you have exactly the opposite?
I have. So here's my thing with the Chiefs Bengals game. I think everybody freaked out about the Bengals offensive line last week. And then when it was fine, they're like, oh, it's going to be okay. But quietly, the Bills pass rush is terrible. Well, not terrible.
Can you believe you're saying that? Isn't that weird?
Yeah, it's not great. It's especially with Von Miller, it's not great. But the Chiefs, it is. Like it's the real deal. Like they're top 2 in sacks. I think they led the league in pressures and pressure rate, something like that. So I think that the offensive line is going to be a problem for Joe Burrow this weekend, and I'm going to take the Chiefs even with the Patrick Mahomes high ankle sprain. Then on the other side, I'm going Eagles pretty much for the same reason. I think that pass rush is going to have Purdy in fits all day long. And with the secondary that they've got too, he's not going to have a ton of open windows to throw to. Maybe we see a crazy Deebo Samuel game where he goes for like 150 rushing yards or something like that. Kyle Shanahan goes crazy with something like that. But I'm taking a Chiefs Eagles Super Bowl.
Okay. It also feels like the first time in a while that all 4 teams are the cream of the crop. Sometimes the Titans will squirt in there and you're like, really? Or even some of those overachieving Packers teams, they had the same point differential shit that the Vikings had. And they're like, are they really that good? No, they lost to the Bucs. But this year it feels like there's no much after the way the Bengals beat the Bills. Like if that would have been fluky or something like that, then you'd be like, the Bills were better. But it just seems like you have the 4 best teams and no debate about it. And I think that makes Sunday really cool. All right, dude. We'll be back Wednesday, and I think that's all we got. You have a wonderful week. All right.
You too, man. See you
later.